Hello, today we are going to be looking at fecal sludge and septage in context. Here we're going to go into the details about fecal sludge management, treatment, and this also covers part of septage. To start with, let's look at the sanitation value chain. And here we start with the user interface, the part that collects the waste. This can be power flash or sometimes open where you drop. And then we have the containment. This is what collects and stores. This could be a septic tank, a pit latrine. Under the pit latrines, we're looking at lined and unlined. Then we have something to do with emptying and transport. Here's when we're looking at dislodging sessions where the cesspool trucks come and pick the waste, and then it's transported to a fecal sludge treatment plant. The other is to do with treatment. In the treatment here, we're looking at fecal sludge treatment. And this case would be you would have co-treatment if you have a wastewater treatment plant. And then you can have a fecal sludge treatment plant dedicated to manage fecal sludge. And some of the treatment technologies here, you have settling tanks, you have drying beds. And then sometimes you can use biodigesters if you're interested in resource recovery. And then lastly is the part to do with the end use or resource recovery. Here I look at recovering products such as soil conditioner and then the aspect of energy in form of biogas. Yes, here the treatment requirements are greatly influenced by the user interface and the containment methods. The user interface will determine whether you're to use water or not. The containment or alike will also be determined by the same. So therefore, this plays a crucial role. Water plays a crucial role in the sanitation value chain availability. That's why when you talk about wash, exclusion of water or sanitation is not something that you can afford to accept. Now let's look at the sanitation value chain into deeper context. And here we're looking at how the sanitation system works. We have the sewer systems. These transport both the solid and liquid. The fecal waste and then the flash water is taken to a centralized treatment system where it's treated off-site, away from the home or premises. The other is the hybrid system where the solids are retained and then you have the liquid flow out. Yes, but these are quite rare. Then you have the septic tanks, or what we call the on-site systems, which include the septic tanks and pits. Here you have the waste contained on site, and it's periodically dislodged using trucks, gulpers, and sometimes you hear of pumps like the Povo pumps or pit vac coming to your site to pick them. The other is to do with the drop and store systems. These always use dry agents, and an example would be the container-based sanitation system. These are quite getting popularity as a result of high population growth, especially in informal settlements and limitations of land. So let's look at what makes the difference between septage and fecal sludge. Septage is what comes from the septic tank, and then fecal sludge is what comes from the pit. The difference is mainly the moisture content. Whereas septage has a high moisture content and there's also partial treatment anaerobically, fecal sludge, usually depending on the type of toilet, may drain out most of the moisture if it's unlined. Whereas for those that are lined, yes, you may have a high moisture content as well. Now that drives us to disposal and reuse options. How do we arrive at this? Well, the major goal of fecal sludge treatment is to protect public health and the environment. For public health, we are looking at pathogens, preventing exposure of pathogens to the environment. While the environmental part, we're looking at managing the high oxygen demand, which comes a lot, which is an indicator of pollution load, and the resultant effect is you will have growth of algae and other pollutants that will in the long run affect water quality wherever they will be disposed. So it's good to emphasize that disposal is well taken care of, and if possible, the sanitation chain is closed by better use options. Now, all this can be arrived at depending on the path you take and the availability of infrastructure. The first one has got to do with independent treatment. Here you have a dedicated fecal sludge treatment plant to handle both the septage and the fecal sludge. The other option is when you have a wastewater treatment plant. So here you involve in co-treatment where you handle maybe the solids and liquids separately, but in most cases here you have to pay attention to your load assessments. If they are wrongly calculated, then you risk failing the treatment plant, and it's very costly to rehabilitate or to restart fecal sludge or wastewater treatment plant after it has failed because of the shock loads. That said, let's now look at the danger of disposing of this waste into the open environment. Yes, there are a couple of practices that we have in place. One of them has got to do with spreading fecal sludge into the open environment with the assumption that this will improve soil fertility and enhance crop growth. However, the risk with this is that much as it's increasingly being banned, but the biggest concern is that the unregulated practices contribute to the spread of pathogens in the environment. And some of these include the helminth eggs, the worms, and then the other that could be thought about are those related to cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. So here, farmers who are using this have to be very cautious about the source of these products they use on their farms. It's not highly advisable to use waste that is untreated, human waste that is untreated on the farm, because of the associated risks with pathogens. Now let's zoom into the invisible forces of treatment. Treatment of fecal sludge and septage is highly dictated by various external choices. Having the physical infrastructure is just half of the battle. There are several issues one has to look at. Now, to start with, one has got to do with demand. Here you're looking at the willingness to pay and the ability to pay. So demand is just not about the number of people available or those who are using a unit, but it's the ability to afford the services that you're providing. The other has got to do with the existing legislation. Here we're looking at laws and policies governing disposal, emptying of these systems. The other has got to do with financial resources. Yes, you need to finance expansions and also service delivery programs and purchases pull trucks so that you can have wider coverage of these areas, which is very important. Lastly, we have got the institutions. Institutional capacity is important here for coordination and governance to ensure that all the other three pillars are met. That has got to do with demand, legislation, and finance. So you need good institutional capacity with clear structures, and then demarcated jurisdictions that guide areas of policy implementation, and also matters to do with enforcement and treatment. Now, let's look at the assessment of need versus demand. Here, private need will always create a high willingness to pay. Take an instance, when your pit latrine is full, you will definitely need to have the problem away. So if a service provider came, definitely you will have that high willingness to accept the services. Unlike when you were told that it's a public good, that okay, we have to treat this waste to keep the environment safe. Here, it's likely that if they charge you for that, your willingness to pay will definitely be low because it does not directly affect you where you are. But yet we forget that we are webbed into the one environment in which we thrive. Now that drives us now to understand the details of what demand is about. So in this case, when you're doing a demand assessment, here looking at demand being equal to the willingness and then plus the ability to pay for a good or service. So this is very important for those involved in sanitation service provision. Never assume that high coverage is equivalent to demand. This is always misleading. So you must look at your ability, your client's ability to pay, and possibly find a way of clustering your clients based on demand. That now takes us to the part where we're looking at legislation. Legislation provides actually the framework for the entire functioning of the system, and this is what we call the rule book policy. And here it establishes issues to do with standards regarding, here we're looking about discharge standards. What quality of effluent are you discharging? Does it meet the national standards? Does it meet the World Health Organization standards, which we ratify, domesticate, and then apply to our specified nations? The others got to do with licensing. Yes, do you have a license to empty? Do you have a license to construct these toilets within the communities? So all this is governed by legislation. And then lastly, legislation will guide on tariffs. So you have seen service providers coming in with different tariff blocks. So this is all embedded in legislation to ensure that there is smooth operation and avoid overcharging or undercharging, so that there is business continuity for most institutions or utilities. The other issue now, we want to look at what happens inside institutions. Here, we're looking at rules and practices that structure interactions. And to start with, we'll look at structures. Institutions need to have clear structures on who is responsible for what. The others go to do with the systems. Here, by systems, we're referring to treatment systems. How well structured are they? Do you have capacity to run them and meet the set requirements? Here, we're looking at the mental models. This is the mindset in the institution. We'll discuss this further in the next session. And then lastly, we've got resources. So all these four, structures, systems, resources, and then the mental models, play a fundamental role in institutional capacity and strengthening. Now, that said, let's dive into the spotlight where we're looking at the mental models. And the mental models, there are two major questions that we ask. The first being, what are they? Here we're looking at the attitudes, assumptions, and then perceptions that exist in society. These will greatly influence the uptake of technology and ability to pay and willingness for the services that may be provided in relation to sanitation. The other question here is, why do these mental models matter? The whole issue is to do with they shape the perceptions and priority of society. So this is important because if sanitation is not valued in a collective mind, definitely the physical system will fail. So it's very important for us to consider the mindset of both the community and then the institutions responsible for managing sanitation systems and services. And remember, sanitation cannot be fragmented. It has to be looked at holistically as a chain. So now we have this other thing to do with financing, which is usually the hardest part. And here we look at weighing the recurring costs, which are associated with salaries, operational costs, which we call OPEX. And then we have the other part to do with the revenue. So you'll notice that in most cases, recurrent costs outweigh the revenues that most of these treatment plants receive. And then that drives us now to how do these treatment plants offset this? And the other thing I would like to even give insights on is most of these treatment plants always hope to even reach the break-even point. So here we're looking at the total costs being equal to the total revenue. And this is rare, but of course it does happen for some systems. Now let's look at where we can get some of the money to support these treatment facilities. Specifically, we're looking at Faecal Sludge. The first has got to do with the delivery charges. You see those trucks that come to the reception bay with Faecal Sludge? Yes. They pay an entry fee to allow them dump the waste at the Faecal Sludge treatment plant. That's one channel for financing. The other has got to do with sale of treated products. Here you could talk about briquettes from Faecal Sludge. You could talk about soil conditioners, what people apply to their gardens. And then for the more advanced stage, you can talk about sale of biogas. The other now has got to do with surcharges. Here with surcharges, we're looking at the cost they add to the water bills or property taxes. And then these are transferred to these utilities or Faecal Sludge treatment plants to offset some of these costs. And then lastly, here we have issues to do with direct municipal subsidies. And the direct municipal subsidies, we're looking at funding or grants that come in to help extend the services into the communities. So these also help improve financing of utilities and Faecal Sludge treatment plants globally. Now, as we come to on the end of this session, there are a few key takeaways that are very important for us to understand or remember. For starters, we need to focus on the reality. Here, treatment plants have to match the available financial and operational resources. Failure to do that, you'll be operating out of your scope, and then you'll risk failure in implementation. The other has got to do with rules. As earlier said, demand is equivalent to willingness to pay and then the ability to pay. So rules can help enforce issues to do with demand. And the demand here, we're looking at the demand for treatment, which is in most cases low, because this is associated with it being a public good. But if you ensure that there are clear policies in place, that there's no open dumping of waste, then in that way you will push most of the residents or the community to seek emptying services. Therefore, to arrive at this, it is important to have a combination of sensitization, education, and most importantly, supported with enforcement of the regulations required to ensure that you have an increase in waste that gets to these waste or Faecal Sludge treatment plants. Lastly, you need to integrate how we manage these systems to ensure that they are sustainable. So in this case, you look at issues to do with income generated from one stream being able to offset costs in the other, as earlier explained in the previous session. So that brings us to the end. Until next time, my name is Isaac Akoit. You can drop your comments for more learning and more engagements. Until next time, goodbye.